today we're going to be doing a bit of a brake job on the 2008 Jeep Wrangler Unlimited Sahara. So what we're going to be working on today is replacing the brake pads and the brake rotor. So I'm going to show you how to do that and to do both the front and the rear in a way that keeps the brakes from making squeaks or sounds when you're done. Uses the best possible materials so that you get a brake job that will stand the test of time. More importantly, when you're out on the trail, when you're out driving your Jeep, especially when you're going up and down a lot of hills, you really don't want to get things going like brake fade. So we want to reduce the total heat stress on the Jeep. We want to get ourselves into a position where we have a strong set of brakes that aren't squeaky when we drive through town, and they stand the test of time. At the end of the day, more than anything, we want something that's going to last us a few years, even if we take it off and do some serious off-roading, and it keeps the family safe when you're on the road every day. So with that, let's get started. One of the most important things we want to do is we want to make sure that we're using good quality parts. In this case, I went with what's called the Duralast Gold brake rotors, high carbon formula. And the reason I chose high carbon is because in this particular case with the Duralast Golds, that high carbon helps to shed heat. We want to make sure this rotor here, first off, is nice and flat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold it and I'm just going to take a look across it. And you can see it's just really perfectly flat. I don't see any damage around the outer edges. I don't see any chips. But most importantly, what we want to do is we want to verify by taking our old rotor. Now I realize I'm telling you this before you've taken your old rotor off, but that's okay. When you take the rotor off, you're going to make this comparison. What we're going to do is just compare the two. Do they look like they're the same part? Does it look like it's about the same size? If I were to set them on the ground and look at them hat-wise, are they going to stand up and have the same basic dimensions? If I find a dimension significantly off, that's a sign I need to go back to the part store and get the right part. So we do want to be careful that we have the right part. We want to make sure that even as we're going to install it, the first thing we do is check to make sure it's right. But more importantly, the bolt pattern matches. Now we're going to do that same thing with our rear brakes. Do I see anything on there? It looks like it might be bent, warped, damaged. If I see anything that's bent, warped, or damaged, and as I compare it to the rotor that's on the rear, again we see they're just identical. If I set them on the ground, they're the same dimensions, same bolt pattern. A pro tip for you, keep one of both the front and rear brake rotors around so that when you go to replace your brake rotors next time, you have something to compare it to right there at the shop instead of being like me and bringing it home and having to take one off first to find out if you actually have the right part. Now for this installation, I've also chosen to use Duralast Gold ceramic brake pads. Why do you ask me to use ceramic brake pads? Because in general, ceramic brake pads tend to shed heat better and last longer than what they're called the metallized or the metallic or the composite made of both metal and ceramic. So we want to open these up, same as before, verify that these are the right size and fit for our Jeep, which I'll show you how to do once we get down underneath it. It will also come with a bag of clips, and that bag of clips has new clips that are going to replace the old clip. Now I'm going to show you how to put these clips in so you can grease them up and keep them quiet over the lifespan of the brakes while you're in your vehicle. Alright, what are we going to need to get this job done? The first thing we're going to need, if you can, is an impact wrench. Otherwise you're going to have a bit of trouble getting both the lugs off the tires. But there's some fairly large, and you're going to see we're going to use a ratchet for that anyway, large bolts underneath that you're going to have to take off in order to get that disc brake off. So in this particular case, I like using my 18-volt Ryobi impact wrench. It has 3 speed settings and works like a champ. In my particular case, I'm using a 3/4 inch wrench. I think technically you're supposed to use an 18 or a 19. I just find that they always get stuck. The nubs get stuck, so I went with this and never looked back. Next off, we need to have a 3/4 inch ratchet, and we're going to want to have a 19 millimeter, a 21 millimeter socket for it. I have a universal socket, which helps me kind of get around. You'll see in a moment how I kind of work my way around things. We're going to need a 3/8 inch wrench, the 13 millimeter socket. We need a 15 millimeter wrench. We're going to hold the backside of our swing out disc brake arm. In this case, I have a 3-inch extension socket for my impact wrench. Find yourself a C-clamp. You're going to need a C-clamp for this job. There's ways for you to kind of try to get around this by trying to huff it, but especially for you in the Rust Belt states, you're not going to be able to knock some of this rusty stuff off without real help. Get yourself a C-clamp. In some cases, if you find that your you got something that's too corroded, replace the part. Don't be afraid to spend a little bit more money and replace the part. Do your job right. Brakes are only important when you need to stop. But man, they're so important when you need to do it. All right, enough yapping. Let's get to work. All right, now one of the things we want to do is remove that master cylinder brake reservoir cap before we get started, so that any backflow that should occur as we compress each one of the pistons inside of the brakes will come out and just flow down the sides. We can wash that off with a hose later, clean it up, but we want to make sure that we remove that, otherwise there's going to be a lot of pressure applied inside that braking system. Now it's important for us, since I'm going to do front and rear brakes at the same time, alrighty, now since I'm going to do both front and rear brakes at the same time, it's important for me to find a good place to support the vehicle. A Jeep is a Jeep, for goodness sake. You can use the frame rails. You know, we got frame rails. It's not some unibody thing. So, we look underneath. We find a nice spot on the rail, right there, about in the middle between the front and the back. And that's it. I just get this up underneath. Don't use your side steps for this. Get underneath the frame rail. Now once we're solidly under that frame rail, we can jack it the rest of the way up. Alrighty, now with both the front and the back of the Jeep jacked up, we can begin removing the tires. One of the things I like to do for the sake of safety is put the tire underneath the axle while I'm working on the vehicle. This way, if it falls off of you should be using jack stands, and you should be using a jack. Having a 3-point system to keep you safe. So there's 2 jack stands and a jack holding it in place. Also put those wheels up underneath the axle. If this thing falls down and breaks a wheel, oh well. If it cuts through your leg, you'll be on faces of death. Look that up, you millennials. Removing the rear tire is relatively easy. 5 bolts. 1, and there's the pain right there. When they get stuck, how do you get them out? Pop off your just like that. They roll all the way down the driveway. We're going to take that front tire, and we're going to move it because we're also going to rotate tires today. We're going to take that front tire, move it toward the back of the vehicle. Now we're going to pop those 5 bolts off the back tire and rotate it to the front. And so we put those tires underneath the bolt, underneath both the front and the rear differential as a safety cap. So if that, for whatever reason, it should fall off the jack or the jack stands, it'll fall down on top of that tire, hold itself in place. I can jack the vehicle back up and hopefully it won't damage it. Alrighty, let's talk really quick about what we're going to be doing. What we're going to be doing here is we're going to open up the back end of this guy, flip this forward so that we can work on our brake pads, replace the clips that are on these brake pads and the brake pads themselves. When we're done with that, we have to pull off 2 21mm bolts on the top and the bottom. First, getting our electronic speed control assist cable out of the way so we don't accidentally damage that. The second thing we're going to do is get this rotor off and put on a new rotor. So let's go to it. First, we're going to take our 13mm socket and our 15mm wrench, and we're just going to loosen up this bottom track right here. So again, as you know, righty-tighty. So as we're going to the right on the clock, it gets tighter. So we want to make sure our ratchet's going lefty-loosey. Sometimes you got to knock that loose, and sometimes you'll find that these guys will be locked on to these. When that happens, so there's a secondary bolt on the back, you want to take your 15mm wrench, put it on the back there. Now in order for this to loosen up, we're going to have to gently pull forward on this rotor to give a little bit less tension so that we can rotate this up and out. We're going to see our old brake pads in place here. And now we can see our piston up top. Now I've put a catch basin underneath the .3 brake fluid master cylinder and took the cap off the top. The reason I did that is because as we recompress this piston, as we've added brake fluid over time, as we recompress this piston, it's going to push this fluid right back up into the top. If you want, and one way you can do this is to release this back on the back side here. You can take off this rubber gasket and release the bleeder valve, and as you're compressing that, it will bleed out. The problem is you want to bleed your brakes after that. We're trying to do this simply without having to bleed the brakes and have it last for a while. So I'm okay with it just spilling out. I got a catch basin in place. We're good to go. All right, let's do this. Take our C-clamp, and we're just going to gently apply pressure. Now, I'm just applying a pressure to the middle. This is just one big hollow cylinder inside here, and I'm applying pressure right now really just to kind of give it a basic press down until it gets to the point where I can put my larger piece on the top. Again, I don't know where you'd get one of these, but I'm sure they exist out there somewhere. You can just put a C-clamp on the bottom and pressure it all the way down. You can put something flat across the top of this and press that in. There's lots of ways you can do it. I'm just taking advantage of the fact that I can run this from the back like that. And I can hear the brake fluid gurgling out at the top of my master cylinder. I'm going to get to go clean that up later. It may happen if you filled your brake, put more brake fluid in, well, the brake fluid, or as your pads wore over time. Okay, so now I can put this on the top now and put this guy in place. That's about as far as I can go with that. And just like that, I can compress this piston now. Again, I can hear that master cylinder leaking over there. It's brake fluid is actually coming out of the top end there. As I'm pressuring I'm applying pressure that's making this hydraulic brake fluid go back through the line and up into the master cylinder. And we want to get this all the way back in. It's kind of like getting a do-over. And just like that, we're done there. That piston is now pressed all the way back in, and we're ready to go. I like to make sure there's no gunk inside here, dirt, whatever, left over. Typically there's not all that much, but it's just good to make sure. The other thing I want to do is just make sure these rubber pieces that I'm torquing the hell out of right now, back and forth, aren't ripped or damaged. So I'm just going to make sure they're still pliable and in place, and they're doing fine. For some of you who lived in the Rust Belt states, one of the things you might want to consider using is this bad boy here. It's called Blaster. And I think it's generally we call it PB Blaster. At least that's what I call it. Penetrating catalyst. There's several different versions of this out of the market, but if you spray your bolts down with this before you start working on it, you can actually significantly reduce the amount of effort and time it takes to get bolts to shear off later. This breaks down inside, or it penetrates inside bolts in between the bolt threads and loosens them up so you can get through even faster. As it says, brakes loose, faster! But now we're going to use our 3/4 inch socket and 21 millimeter. And up top, we're going to remove this electronic speed control cable and get that out of the way so we don't damage that accidentally as we're loosening this top bolt. You can get your ratchet in carefully with that universal joint. Even though it's at an angle, that lets me remove it. Now we want to be careful because this is gonna want to go flying on us. Don't let it go flying on you. Keep it carefully up. We can open it up, and that'll give us better access to the inside clip that we can now put our new brake pads on. So let's get to work. Now, in my personal opinion, these should always come with brake grease, organic grease as it's known, but in this particular case, this did not come with my kit. Fortunately, I'm the kind of Jeep owner who always keeps around an extra thing of brake grease, as I've done this job enough times over the years. I'm going to punch a hole through that top edge. I mean, you can buy this, it comes in little packets, but you want to have some as you go to do this job. Now, there's a little metal piece that you see here that goes along the back. When you hear your brake scraping, this is the actual sound you hear, is that little metal piece beginning to rub against the actual outside surface of the brake drum. That squealing sound is called the brake wear indicator. And the brake wear indicator is going to go on the inside of the vehicle, not on the outside. Although they look really similar, and they probably could work that way. You notice how this one has no tab on it. That one wants to be on the outside of the vehicle. So the brake wear indicator is on the inside closest to the engine. The outside has no brake wear indicator. So, we're going to carefully take a look. Are these pads the same size? Are they the same dimensions? Does this look like this guy here will go into the same slot as the old one came out of? And the answer to that question is yes. So in this case, what we're going to do is remove our clips. So we want to make sure we have the same size and type of clip that was in there in the first place. So what I want to do is just pull out one clip, and we notice that this one is the wrong size. It's going the other direction. It's opposite. So I can set that aside to go on the other side. And the other side. And the correct side. So we see how these are exactly the same. They look the same. Oh. And they fit the same. Now what I like to do is I like to apply just a little bit of grease to that outer edge. Just the faintest little amount there. Again, not a lot. You can kind of see what I'm doing here. Oh, that's a lot. And the reason I like to do this is if these things start to grate and slide around as they're going, I'd prefer that that sound was dampened by a thin layer of grease as opposed to making a ton of noise as they're sliding around in and out of this thing. Now, if you can't remember how to put your clips back in, if all your clips fall out, like in this case 2 of my dirty clips fell out, an easy way to remember how these clips are supposed to go in is to remember that if you look at the actual piece itself, it's built similarly to how these clips go. The bend side of the clip, as we're looking at the round side, goes down towards the round side of the thing. So, and this large metal clip on the top, this big metal tab, goes to the outside and around. So what we do is we go clip on the inside and push it to the outside, and it'll clip right in place. And she'll be sitting there ready for you to go. We're going to do the same thing to the other side, just the littlest bit of grease that we're going to apply to this outside edge. Clip the inside and press. And there we go, she's golden. I got both the clips on there. Now remember, the metal brake wear indicator tab is going to go on the inside. Now making this brake be quiet is really the trick. This is really the goal we all have. We don't just want to do a brake job. We want those brakes to be quiet. When we come to a stop, we don't want to hear eep. That'll drive people insane, especially your passengers, your spouse, your dog. They'll start howling. It can be really bad. So what we want to do is we want to just gently pry this little metal cap that comes with all these off. If you've got one where it's attached, I don't know what to tell you, man. Take it back and demand something else. Because what you want to do is we're going to take CRC disc brake quiet. It stops brake squeals and squeaks. We want to get our disc brake quiet, and we're just going to put a nice little layer, just like so, right on the top. Now in my case, what I did is I used an old piece of shelf bracket, and all I'm doing is using this as a bit of a squeegee to just kind of squeegee this across the whole surface. We want a nice even coat across really the whole top of this, as much as I can get that splayed out. I got some bolt holes here that kind of help to hold this in place during the manufacturing process, but all in all, I just want a nice clean bunch of this over the top. I can put that top metal piece back on. And when I'm done, I'm going to take some more disc brake quiet, and I'm just going to apply another little strip of this right across the top. We're going to do the same thing on the top of this little pad too. And the reason why we squeegee this in place is we just want this to be a nice thin coat that helps us to basically clamp down on the additional vibration that can occur. This helps to dampen those vibrations that cause that disc brake to squeal. Now, next step in that process, we're going to grease up the outer edge. And we can put a fair amount of grease on here. I might have went a little too crazy there, but you get the idea. You can grease that up a bit. This piece has to slide inside those little metal clips that we just put in the channel there. So we want this to have some ability to basically slide in place there. You don't have to get too crazy with it, but we want to really coat the outer edge of this guy. All right. Easy way to remember how these go in. Number one, the metal brake wear indicator has to go in toward the engine side. Number two, it has to go the same direction as the hump on this external brake flip out thing. So all we got to do is just gently put this in place. I like to get one side nice and in place, and then you can usually just insert into the other side. Oops, I'm doing this backwards. We come in from this side, get one side in place, and I can just press the other one right in on the back side. And just fit that guy in place, nice and easy. Okay, now that it's holding in place, I'm going to put the clips on the other side and put the other one in. Now we're going to do the same thing with the front side, these two clips here. Now, these will go basically opposite the clips we saw on the other side. Again, if all your clips fall out, like what just happened to me, easy way to remember is follow the curvature of the thing. So in this case, this bend that you see here on this one side is going to go down. If this is bent up this way, your carrier is bent this way, that's going to go, that bend will go down. And this external clip up top, this guy here, this tab, which you see here, is going to go outside, to the outside edge of the brakes. So I push this in place so that the back goes in first, and I press it, fit that down in place. It'll be just the opposite of the thing you see on the other side. Now I got a little bit of grease right here. I'm just going to use this to popped off when I was doing the other side here. And I can just run some of that grease along the outer edge there. So in place this goes, and clips in place just like so. Now just like we did on the last one, we're going to take this top metal piece off, just pry it loose with a screwdriver, put a layer of disc brake quiet along that top edge. We're going to take some sort of squeegee. You can use a butter knife for this. You can use a steak knife. You can use a samurai sword, whatever it is you think you need to use. We're going to layer this piece back on the top. We're going to put another layer on the top. And we're going to squeegee that out just the same. So we got a nice even coating going on there. Nice and even. And then we grease the outside edge. And again, the outside curvature has to follow this, but we want the sticky disc brake quiet to go to the outside edge of the discs, or the brakes themselves. So again, we're just going to pop in one side, press that outer edge, press the inner edge. Yay, got it in place finally. And we want to just firm that up, center it. And if you did like I did and you got orange crap everywhere, it's going to get coated in disc brake soot later anyway, but you can just wipe it down right now. You want to make sure you got that grease inside those channels. And at this point, this guy's ready to go. And what I like to do at this point is just gently, a few screws, put that guy back on. Because when we put this back on, the whole piece is going to go right back in. At this point, we can remove that disc brake, set it to the side. And we're going to put our new disc brake on, our high carbon Duralast gold brake on. And there we go. Now what we want to do is just gently press this over the top of the rotor It shouldn't really require much effort because we compressed that cylinder already. And it'll pretty much just kind of hover in place back here. What we want to do is take that 21mm bolt and run it through and just kind of hold this in place while we find, until we find where that bolt's supposed to go in. Hey, how you doing back there? And on the other side, down here on the bottom, do the same thing. Once we got the top in place, the bottom's a little easier to find. But again, just gently, by hand, screw that in. Now the reason I like to leave this loose is because I can now lift this back up, the brake pads stay in place, and I can now bolt this back in place. Relatively easily. Now as we go to close this, we're going to compress this so that the brake retainer can drop in place. Again, gently put this in back, tighten it by hand, and we're going to reverse the direction of our ratchet and just tighten it up. If this guy wants to be loose, this bottom bolt down here decides it wants to keep rotating without your help, all you got to do is just put a 15mm wrench, which we have ready, but we didn't need in this particular case, right around it. You want to use kind of a thin wrench, but that'll do the job. Okay, now that that's done, we're going to go through a checklist to make sure that everything's in place. And what we're going to do is basically check the bottom and the top by putting our wrench, or our ratchet in this case, my impact wrench, and just making sure that they're still tight. And so we're checked there. Check there. Want to make sure our electronic speed cable, sensor cable, is back in place. We want to take our 13mm ratchet, just check that top and that bottom bolt. And if we bled the brakes, which we were not in our particular case, we want to make sure that we put this rubber cap back on and that the brake is actually closed, which I believe is a 10 or an 11. We're not doing that in this particular case. This point in time, everything's back in place. We can proceed back to the back, or we can put this tire back on for safety's sake. And that's what I'm going to do right now, is I'm going to take that tire that was on the back of the vehicle and go ahead and impact wrench it back onto the vehicle on the top. Alrighty, now just like we did on the front of the brakes, what we're going to do back here is we're going to loosen up this bottom piece here, the bottom bolt that goes on the back side of this brake bracket. So again, I want to make sure I'm going lefty-loosey because we're releasing. And I got lucky and she just came off by hand. I don't need to use my 15mm wrench. Okay, now once I've taken this bolt off the back, what I'm going to do is come in here and I'm just going to pry. Don't do this if you're planning on reusing your brake rotor. I'm just going to pry this out a little bit. There we go. And I can just twist that right around and take those brake pads off now. More importantly, this gives me some room. There's one of my clips. This gives me some room to basically get back here and get the rest of the job done, because in this case, I have to use my 19mm socket now to take off the two bolts on the back of this. I also have to use my angle and it came off easily enough. So I can turn it mostly by finger. And there she goes. Now I'm going to hold on to this while I reach inside and just loosen that up with your fingers. We're going to set this bad boy up top. And we'll get back to that in a second. To get this rear brake rotor off is not the same as getting the front one off. What you're going to have to do is use your old friend Mr. Sledgehammer. Tap the back of the rotor, not the dust shield. And she'll come right off. Alright, let's compress this piston and get to work. And again, this is going to bleed out from the front, so make sure you take the cap off your master brake cylinder. Because if you've got too much brake fluid in, if you decided you were going to fill it over the year or two while you were using your brakes, you're going to have too much on there, which is what happened with us. how quickly you forget sometimes that your brake master has a minimum and a max. If it goes below the minimum, that means something's wrong. It doesn't mean add brake fluid necessarily. And one of the things we can do while we got this open is go ahead and grease both of these bolts. Here I actually pulled one out so you could get a look at it because I have the bolt off on the top there. Now that you got it open, there's a good chance to get that done. Inside of the vehicle. The one without the brake wear indicator goes on the outside of the vehicle. We're also going to replace all 4 channel clips. And we'll do that right now. So just like I did before, what I want to do is either carefully make sure you have the right one, or remember that, in this case I'm showing you, this bow that's in the bottom part of this, not this little flat part that lays on top, but the bow in the bottom goes down relative to the curvature of your brake piece. I like to grease mine. It reduces squeal and squeak. Much like CRC, this outer loop clip goes on the outside, so we push in first to get the inside clip set and then pressure fit the thing in place. Same thing for the other side. So we remove, set that aside, and again, just like we did on the front. So since I'm doing the outside, it's the one without the brake wear indicator. Remove that metal tab, and there we go. A nice thin layer across that whole surface. As much that we can reasonably get without making an enormous mess out of everything. We put our metal clip back on, the right direction preferably. And we're going to do it again. We're going to coat the top of this. Because I personally feel like this metal plate is the source of most of the pain. It's what's vibrating. And it's there for a reason. So let's just coat it really nice and call it a day. Again, we got to grease the outside channel edge. We're going to grease the outside channel edge of the brake pads. And again, the CRC disc brake plate goes to the outside edge. And in this particular case, because we have the metal brake wear indicator tab, that also goes to the outside edge. That's going to go on the inboard side of our brakes. So turn it sideways, pull it about to the middle, and just gently rotate this back in place, kind of keeping it in place, and it'll kind of snap back into that spot, and Bob's your uncle. So now that we have both sides done, we're able to begin the process of putting this disc brake back on. First thing we're going to do is just gently set our rotor back in place. So keep this guy out of the way, and just pressure it right in place. Now in this case I have to press these pads in just slightly more than they were. So just a little push on both sides so I can have enough room to get this guy in place. And we're going to gently make sure that we haven't rotated like I just did. Gently put those pads between the rotors. Hold that in place. And on the back side, we're going to bolt these back in. So one of the 19mm bolts is back in now. I'm going to go ahead, while I'm thinking about it, and put this other one on the back side here. So just holding that finger tight in place. And on the bottom, where that other bolt went, now we can just shake the whole assembly a little bit and find where it's supposed to go. Put that in as far as we can by hand, finger tight. Get out my 3/4 inch ratchet with a 19mm bolt or 19mm socket on it. And we're going to begin tightening this up. the bottom as well. Nice and tight. Now on the top side, I'm going to use my angle adapter. So I have a good purchase on this guy. Because I want it to be as solid on there as I can get it before I rotate. And we're on there pretty tight. Finally, I'm going to double check. Make sure this guy's on tight. If it starts rotating on you, like mine is, that's where that 15mm wrench comes into play, although it just caught just now, but you would take that 15mm wrench and hold the inside in place. In this case, we're all good. Want to make sure that top one's on tight and the bottom one's on tight. If you bleed your brakes, you want to go ahead and make sure that's on as well. And with that, we can put the tire back on and we're ready to go. We're ready to go pump those brakes, make sure they're tight, and go take it out for a test drive. Let's get those tires back on. Okay, now that we're done, we want to put that master brake cylinder reservoir cap back on, and then clean up any sort of mess that may have happened from overflow on the top. First couple times you press on that brake, it's going to feel really loose, and you'll feel it tighten up. But give it a few good pushes until you feel that begin to bolster itself. Okay, it's time to test it out. The first thing we're going to do, start it up, leave it in park. We're going to step on the brake a few times, make sure we've got it pumped up all the way. Put it in drive and just see that it holds in place. That's step number one. Move it a little bit. And here we go. What I like to do is go down a street where I'm not going to have any emergency stops. And we're just going to check by gently pressing and listening. I'm on a fairly quiet street. We're just listening to see if there's any noise coming from the brakes. Do I hear any squeaky sounds? Do I hear anything grinding? Do I hear one of my clips sounding like it's escaped and it's rattling in its place? We just want to listen. So we're not going too fast, nice and slow, and just testing our brakes out to make sure they work. And sure enough, stops like a champ. And there we have it. For an afternoon of work and a little over 300 bucks, we were able to and there we have it. For an afternoon and a little over 300 bucks, we were able to replace both the brakes, brake pads, and rotors. Got our brakes running again. Jeep sounds great. No squealing when we stop. Here at FindMyJeep.com, our goal is to help you keep every Jeep running. So take that Freedom Machine, get her on the road, and get out in the sunshine.